From The Australian, this is the weekend edition of The Front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's the NRL Grand Final this weekend, and last weekend we saw Snoop Dogg perform at the AFL Grand Final. Of course, there was some footy too, but the main thing I'll be watching for is Teddy Swims. He's an artist who kind of created his own career. He started out doing covers on YouTube, became a huge recording artist, and his song Lose Control has had 2 billion streams. I'm going to listen to that today with The Australian's audio lead, Jasper Leak. Jasper, I don't know if you're a massive Teddy Swims fan, but I am going to subject you to some of this music.
Bring it on.
And I want you to tell me what's going on in these songs.
Sure.
And why his hiring for the grand final, which is just another gig, caused some controversy among the fandom.
Sure.
Snoop Dogg's outing at the AFL grand final was hugely controversial when a bunch of people kind of suddenly discovered that Snoop Dogg is a bit of a misogynist. But of course, he's a pro and he pulled out a pretty amazing show. So let's start by listening to a bit of Lose Control.
Okay.
Something's got a hold on me lately. No, I don't know myself anymore.
As Peter V'landys said, he can sing.
He can
Like
sing.
the walls are all closing in, and the devil's knocking at my
The production skews really sort of like retro 60s soul ballad. The songwriting also follows that formula. But I think what makes it interesting is you've got this kind of young white guy who's covered in tattoos convincingly singing that sort of a song. And it's a great song. I think when the chorus lands, that's an unforgettable melody. Naturally,
guitar.
face-melting guitar solo as the musical bridge. They've stayed really true to that aesthetic that everybody who likes and grew up listening to music like Etta James or Sam Cooke, they've sort of stayed really true to that style of production and instrumentation.
I feel like every generation kind of discovers soul
Yes.
again.
Yeah, it's so true.
You know, do you remember when the movie The Commitments came out?
Yeah, I love The
And
Commitments.
suddenly a whole generation is like, wow, this is incredible. And they were white Irish people singing
Yes.
like black people from the 60s. You know,
Totally.
they sounded like they could have come out of Motown.
Yeah, that's right. And then 10 years later, you probably had, Macy Gray. And then maybe 5 years after that, you had Joss Stone. Remember her? And then sort of around that time, we also had Amy Winehouse.
He uses the stage name Teddy Swims, which is itself a name that comes out of internet culture. Swims stands for someone who isn't me sometimes.
Oh, okay.
It's a joke.
Right.
You know, from kind of internet forums
Oh,
back when
right.
they were a thing. And he's been very vocal about his own struggles with mental health, and he's very modern in all those senses, isn't he?
Yes.
And an interesting choice then for the NRL, because these big footy finals, they have to appeal to everyone. But of course, they also have to find an artist, hopefully, who's touring at the time.
Yes.
So it needs to be someone who's in the culture.
Yes.
It can go badly wrong, can't it?
Sure can. Yeah, we've seen that. I mean, domestically, we saw that in 2011 when the AFL booked Meatloaf to perform at their pre-game grand final. So even the band with their Marshall stacks and backing vocalists, they're sort of quite awkwardly squished into what looks like a seating area at the stadium. How is Meatloaf going to appeal to a wider audience beyond whatever audience the organisers imagined was already there for Meatloaf within the AFL community?
Yeah, you have to be an incredible performer, I think, to cross over in a live performance like that. I've seen Shirley Bassey do that. And that's who Tina Turner is, isn't it?
Well, I was waiting for you to bring Tina Turner up. Yeah, I mean, I think Tina Turner is the best example of one of the big sporting codes getting it right. And I think this is what we miss with people like Teddy Swims. You know, I think he's a fantastic singer, and I've got no problem with Teddy Swims performing the NRL Grand Final, but I just don't see how his music is sort of emblematic of the game itself. And I think that the best examples of pre-game entertainment like Tina Turner managed to managed to be incredible performances that somehow connected to the culture of football at the time. Her singing the best and then the NRL pairing the best with footage of Alf Langer and Andrew Eddingshausen and Paul Sirenen, I mean, that created a cultural moment, like a very lasting cultural moment.
It was sort of the dawn of the NRL discovering that it could be sexy, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
I remember vividly the ad campaign where she was running along a beach with E.T. and various other guys, and she managed to somehow, as a 40-plus woman, maybe she was 50, run along a beach with these 22-year-old guys.
Yeah.
And it all looked really natural.
Yes. For her to sort of find this home in the NRL in Australia in the 90s is not something that I think people could have necessarily seen coming, but it worked. If that's the gold standard, it doesn't feel like the formula that helped create that incredible moment is being applied when making the big pre-game entertainment decisions these days. I think culturally, it's a bit lazy. This isn't going to be a Tina Turner in the 90s moment. I struggle to see the overlap between Teddy Swims' music and NRL in 2025.
Yeah, I think the NRL got its fingers badly burnt with the experiment in making their players sexy because that made their proclivity towards bad behaviour a story, a completely justifiable story. This is a code where they've had players picking up schoolgirls at school visits. They've had allegations of gang rape. They've had people on trial for sexual assault. And it's so bad that they've had to institute a policy for what to do when someone is accused of a crime. They have a no-fault stand down, which means we don't penalise you until you've actually been convicted. You know, this is not a problem they're dealing with in netball.
Right.
But they did make them very sexy for a while there. And they are kind of sexy guys, you know.
Sure.
They're in their early 20s. They're really rich.
Yeah.
They now don't have to have other jobs, which they used to do.
Yeah.
I think now the NRL cannot have an ad campaign with them running down the beach with their shirts off because it just sends all the wrong signals. They're trying to pretend that these guys are all family. The NRL wants the image to be that these guys are all happily married and at home with their young children.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. Do you think that Teddy Swims will play any role in sort of underpinning the narrative that the NRL are trying to spin with that?
Yeah, I mean, he's very wholesome. He demonstrates how much Australia has changed since 2017 because that's when the NRL booked Macklemore for the grand final.
Right.
And it was a massive controversy. You were probably living in LA at the time,
I was,
so you might have been oblivious to this, but you know, we were on the path towards a vote of some kind on marriage equality, which was very controversial, of course. And people like Bob Katter and the Federal Coalition made it a big deal that the NRL was going woke and that it was endorsing same-sex marriage. And
if they take the most sacred day of the year, outside of Christmas, of course, and use it to promote their sexual proclivities, that is an insult and an offence to every single follower of rugby league in this country. Well, this little bloke, you know, Macklin Moore or whatever his name is, he's coming over here, right? Well, mate, go home. We don't want you, right? The people that'll be there at this game don't want you.
it was a depressing time in Australian history, which I think showed we have actually moved on from that.
This angle to the story I think is quite interesting because I think if you compare NRL to AFL, I think AFL has a reputation for being more progressive in its politics. The AFL's had a pride round since 2016, something that the NRL, I believe, didn't even attempt until 2021, and that immediately was a bust. In response to that, NRL chairperson Peter V'landys was seen by some to strike a compromise when he opted for, or the league opted for, a respect round as opposed to a pride round. But that was also seen as a significant backward step by other fans of the game. So this year, it's interesting because you've sort of got Snoop Dogg, who's been embroiled in some LGBTQI plus controversy in the lead up to the AFL grand final, and then you've got Teddy Swims playing the NRL pre-game grand final. And in some respects, I feel like the NRL booking Teddy Swims was a sort of a direct rebuke to the AFL's decision to book Snoop Dogg for their pre-game grand final concert.
Snoop Dogg is 53 years old. He is one of the most famous artists in the world and has been for decades. He famously said, and we've all been reminded in the past couple of weeks, that when he went to see the movie Lightyear, which is the prequel to the Toy Story movies, he was shocked that there was a lesbian love story in the movie. He was appalled. He said he was embarrassed because he was with his grandchild.
He backpedaled after that appearance on the It's Giving podcast where he made those statements. For him, it was, he was sort of echoing what has probably become quite a common conservative viewpoint on this, which is, at what age is it suitable for there to be same-sex relationships on screen? The interesting thing about this is if you go overseas, if you go to America, they're reserving their high-profile spots for bands like Tame Impala. I mean, Tame Impala headlined Coachella in 2019, for God's sake. I think that's why I would advocate for these codes to use Australian bands or to give Australian bands the spotlight at these sort of high-profile events. Up until this year, the amount of concerts that were allowed to be hosted across Allianz Stadium and the SCG per year were 4. So rightfully, Chris Minns has come along, he's lifted that ban and he said, no, we're going to host 20 concerts a year now between those two venues. He also instituted a rule called Michael's Rule that mandated that every international act that performed one of these concerts needed to book a local act as their support act. So that's created some really great sort of opportunities for local artists. But I sort of wonder, how much is that really doing for the local music community? I think you could argue it's probably impacting the local economy more effectively than it is benefiting the local music community. But still, it's better than nothing.
One of the issues for the Australian music scene is the same issue that meant that there were only 4 concerts: noise, urban gentrification in places like Surrey Hills, which used to have probably 12 pubs where you could hear a band every night of the week.
Yeah.
Now there are none because noise complaints have shut them all down.
Yeah.
If artists don't have the opportunity to play in a pub every Friday night, how do they get good enough to be on stage with Taylor Swift at Allianz Stadium?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right. I mean, it's like what would the Beatles be without their years in Hamburg?
We talk about funding the arts a lot too, which seems to mean giving grants to kind of opera companies and ballerinas. I don't know why we don't just change the rules in urban settings. If you've moved to Carlton or in Brisbane or in Sydney, you don't get to shut down live music. Maybe it can stop at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
But it seems outrageous that residents groups have now got the power to have killed off music.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Growing up in Sydney, for me, Sydney was a music city. I think about music was such a huge part of my childhood, and I have a vivid recollection of walking around Sydney and there just being music around. And it is a tragedy to me that that has disappeared. It's a tragedy to me that a lot of these venues that I grew up playing at have closed their doors. And it really instills a sense of concern for me when I think about the next generation coming up that might be, musically inclined or have certain dreams that might be hamstrung as a result of all of these venues being closed.